Alright, so like we mentioned in our previous video about New Caledonia, from time to time we're going to be doing a Ghost Countries newsflash. Sometimes we'll cover a single topic more in depth, but today we'll be looking into a few stories from different parts of the world. Starting off in Africa, a recent surge in attacks linked to a terrorist organization known as the Allied Democratic Forces resulted in deadly protests in the Democratic Republic of the Congo's North Kivu province. Earlier this month, the ADF reportedly killed more than 40 people in an attack on Mayikengo village. Similar attacks by the ADF elsewhere in the eastern DRC have also claimed the lives of more than 80 people. Considered the deadliest of nearly a dozen or so groups operating in said country, the ADF is reported to have killed about 6,000 people since 2013. And while it now primarily operates in the DRC, the ADF was originally established over in Uganda. Its eventual leader, Jamil Mukulu, was born a Christian but later converted to Islam and embraced Salafism while studying abroad in Saudi Arabia. Upon his return to Uganda, he joined a rebel group called the National Army for the Liberation of Uganda, which aimed to instigate a Konjo-led rebellion and overthrow President Yoweri Museveni. For a bit more context, the Konjo and Amba peoples of southwestern Uganda historically fought to establish an independent kingdom called Rwenzururu. And in 2008, Uganda did officially recognize Rwenzururu as a subnational kingdom. Anyway, back in 1995, Mukulu helped form a coalition between Nalu and several other rebel groups, including the Ugandan Muslim Liberation Army and portions of Uganda's Tablighi Jamaat sect, thus giving rise to the ADF. And while the ADF did occasionally express continued support for Konjo self-determination, it primarily viewed its struggle as seeking to establish an Islamic state. To be fair, these two concepts don't have to be mutually exclusive, I suppose. The ADF, however, was soon forced to relocate to the DRC, where it received training and logistical support from the Sudanese government. In the late 1990s, the group launched a series of attacks in Uganda. This prompted the Ugandan People's Defense Forces, then operating in the eastern DRC during the First and Second Congolese Wars, to launch a counteroffensive against the ADF. By 2001, the ADF was significantly degraded and sought to use the remote terrain of the eastern DRC to remobilize through the recruitment of Congolese members. This included the kidnapping of hundreds of children who the ADF forcibly recruited as child soldiers. The group would, however, remain largely dormant until 2013, when it launched a series of attacks in the eastern DRC. In response, Congolese forces began counterinsurgency operations against the ADF, prompting Mukulu to flee to Tanzania, where he was arrested in 2015 and subsequently extradited to stand trial in Uganda. Following this, the ADF appears to have splintered into multiple factions, with some members remaining loyal to Mukulu, while others rallied behind Musa Baluku, who previously served as the group's political commissar and was in charge of teaching the ADF's ideology to new recruits. Under Baluku, the ADF began to use the name Medina at-Tawhid wa Mushahideen, meaning City of Monotheism and Holy Warriors in Arabic, and in 2020, he announced the ADF had ceased to exist and rather had incorporated itself into the Islamic State's newly established Central Africa Province Division. ISCAP and/or the ADF then carried out a series of bombings across Uganda in late 2021. This prompted joint Congolese-Ugandan operations against the ADF. And President Felix Tshisekedi of the DRC even authorized the deployment of U.S. counterterrorism forces. Despite this, the situation in the eastern DRC has continued to worsen. And since March 2022, more than 1.6 million people have been driven from their homes in North Kivu. In total, about 6.9 million people across the DRC were displaced last year. Staying on the African continent, Turkey just recently concluded two major deals with Somalia. On February 22nd, Ankara and Mogadishu signed a memorandum of understanding establishing the Turkish armed forces as a partner in Somalia's maritime security and law enforcement for the next 10 years. As per the MOU, Turkey will reconstruct, equip, and train the Somali Navy while receiving 30% of the revenue from Somalia's exclusive economic zone. Proponents say this will bring much-needed security and stability. Somalia loses roughly $500 million annually to illegal fishing, most notably to Chinese and Iranian vessels, while the country's oil and gas reserves of up to 30 billion barrels remain largely untapped since civil war broke out in 1991. And speaking about hydrocarbons, shortly after concluding the Maritime Defense and Security Deal, Ankara and Mogadishu announced yet another MOU establishing Turkey as a partner in Somalia's exploration, appraisal, and extraction of petroleum blocks, with the possibility of Turkey taking over sales and distribution. Ankara's presence in Somalia is part of a Turkish push to establish a greater presence in Africa that started back in 1998 with the creation of the African Action Plan. By 2008, Turkey was declared a strategic partner of the African Union and opened at least a dozen embassies across the continent. The Horn of Africa is critical for Turkish interests because of its geographical position, rich mineral resources, and development potential. That being said, Turkey is far from the only power involved in Somalia. As recently as mid-February, Mogadishu signed an MOU with Washington to open 5 new military bases in the country. Turkey's primary competitor in Somalia, however, is the United Arab Emirates, which has embarked on a campaign of infrastructure projects and security agreements across the region, including building major ports in Somaliland, an unrecognized country in the north of Somalia that declared independence from Mogadishu back in 1991. It remains unknown if Turkey's enforcement of Somali maritime security will extend to Somaliland waters, which Ankara recognizes as part of Somalia. This past May, Somaliland's foreign minister explicitly stated that Turkish naval vessels would not be welcome in its territorial waters. It's probably also worth mentioning that on January 1st, Ethiopia, a close regional partner of the UAE, announced it had concluded an MOU with Somaliland, possibly exchanging recognition for sea access and the lease of a military base. Heading east, the Maldives recently decided to ban Israeli tourists from entering the country due to the ongoing war in Gaza. Earlier in June, the Maldivian parliament moved ahead with a bill to amend the immigration law to bar entry to both Israeli passport holders and Israelis with dual citizenship. It was accepted unanimously and then sent to a committee for review. What's more, President Mohamed Muizzu appointed a special envoy to assess the needs of Palestinians and launched a fundraising telethon which raised nearly $650,000 in donations. The ban is backed by the ruling People's National Congress, which won a supermajority in April's parliamentary elections. Israel's foreign ministry condemned the law, recommending Israelis avoid traveling to the Maldives altogether, and for those currently there to consider leaving. Israeli tourists, predominantly surfers, first started visiting the Maldives after a previous ban was lifted in the early 1990s. That being said, Israeli tourists represent just 0.58% of arrivals last year. According to official figures, some 10,966 Israelis visited the Maldives in 2023, down from a peak of 15,748 tourists in 2022. During the first 4 months of 2024, just over 500 tourists from Israel visited the South Asian country. However, the ban is unlikely to be a blanket ban, according to the country's Attorney General, as some have expressed concern that in doing so, the law could impact some of the 2 million Arab citizens of Israel. Meanwhile, on the Korean peninsula, tensions are rising after the North released thousands of balloons filled with cigarette butts, waste paper, cloth, vinyl, and other trash, including, well, poop. After the first wave of balloons, Kim Yo-jong, the sister of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, said they were gifts of sincerity for South Koreans who cry for freedom of expression. Pyongyang claimed the balloons were released in retaliation for an ongoing campaign by North Korean defectors and activists in South Korea, who regularly send balloons containing leaflets alongside food, medicine, money, and USB sticks with K-pop music videos and dramas across the border. In 2023, the South Korean Constitutional Court struck down a contentious law that criminalized the releasing of anti-North Korean balloons, which the court called an excessive restriction on free speech, meaning that Seoul currently has no legal grounds to ban civilians from sending balloons to the north. Instead, it suspended a 2018 inter-Korean agreement which would allow South Korea to resume military drills along its border with North Korea. South Korea also resumed loudspeaker broadcasts directed at North Korea on June 9th. These speakers are reportedly designed to blare pop music and political messages as far as 6.21 miles or 10 kilometers, enough to reach the city of Kaesong and its nearly 200,000 residents. In 2015, when South Korea restarted loudspeaker broadcasts for the first time in 11 years, North Korea fired artillery rounds across the border, prompting South Korea to return fire. The South withdrew loudspeakers from border areas in 2018 during a brief period of engagement with the North. However, Pyongyang now seems to be responding in kind, with military reports indicating North Korea is installing its own loudspeakers along the heavily armed border with the South. If you have any geopolitical news you'd like to see us cover in an upcoming video, let us know down in the comments below. Also, a huge thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon, and if you'd like to support the channel too, there's a link in the description.